Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Erin Urban. I'm a certified executive accelerator coach, and what I do is I help driven, evolving, and emerging professionals remove career roadblocks so you can achieve more impact, income, and influence. And today we have a very exciting show on Career Coffee Chat Live and podcast. And as you tune in, I'd love to welcome you to the show. Please say hi, say your name, say where you're from. I want to welcome you to the show. Come on in. I would love to hear your comments and questions and insights because today we have a very interesting topic. Does your authenticity clash with the company culture, and could it potentially sabotage your career growth and or common sense sabotaging your career growth as well? Today we'll be talking about common sense career disasters. What you've always done won't necessarily get you where you want to go, because we're talking with Csaba Toth. He'll be sharing from his book Uncommon Sense in Unusual Times, and from his research about how culture, diversity, and social norms drive your path to success. What we can expect today is a little bit about how time and energy and opportunities are often lost due to friction between people that behave differently than ourselves. So we'll be chatting a little bit about DE&I today, and also how we rarely outperform our own self-image and what that means for your career growth. And additionally, how company culture often drives your authenticity level and what that means for your career fulfillment. So as you hop on the Career Coffee Chat live show, please say hi. Say your name. I'd love to welcome you to the show. And if you're watching the podcast or the replay later, feel free to pop your comments or questions in the chat. We will see them. We will get back to you. And if you're watching on a podcast on one of the many major channels, give us a like, a thumbs up, or a rating. We'd much appreciate that. So share the message with those like-minded seeking career growth, just like you. So more about Csaba. He will give you the blueprint to finding success in strong VUCA cycles. And Lord knows we are in a strong change cycle right now. He's the founder of ICQ Global with partners in 35 countries, and he has a strong background in establishing startups to working with Fortune 500 companies. Most importantly, he's here to help demystify why you may or may not see the career growth you expect depending on the company culture you're with right now. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Toth to the show, who's tuning in from the United Kingdom. Great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So share with us a little bit while people are still tuning in to the live show. What was the catalyst that made you found ICQ Global? What was that wake up moment when you're like, there's a crying need for this and I really need to go after this?
I think this is the moment when a lot of people come up with some inspiring and noble story, but mine is not like that. I think the best solutions are born out of frustration and pain, and this is what happened to me. So just in a nutshell, I grew up in Hungary, no idea what to do, studied Italian linguistics, got a master's, and I came to the UK with pretty much no transferable skills. And then after 3 or 4 years, I went to uni and I got a master's in international management. And it was much more practical because I specialized in Eastern and Western European joint ventures. And for example, the data showed that the gap between the two generations in Hungary was much bigger than the gap between the new generation and the Western Europeans, which contradicted everything that we learned about what all the academics claimed. Common sense. Culture is country-specific and stable. I thought, no, look at the numbers. That's not true at all. But who are you to question the big boys? That's not really polite. So I forgot about it, and I started my own company, which was a restaurant booking site. You book a table, we get the money. That's the business model, but it was much more exciting than that. We started with 35 restaurants here in Brighton, and in 1 year we had 5,500 all over the UK, became the fastest growing listing, and also it turned into a joint venture with a software company. On paper, everything made sense. We were growing. We were getting the results. But in real life, I couldn't stand the other CEO. He was French. I'm not saying that was a problem, but definitely didn't help. So we got to the point where we had to get out of the business. It wasn't pretty at all. We sold the shares. It is still online, but we are not involved anymore. And this is when I started my research. I didn't understand how come that was the exact topic of my dissertation. That department itself is number 1 in the world in its category. I had years of experience. How come I couldn't put that theory into practice. So I got certified in a lot of different things, and I wanted to understand what went wrong and how we could fix it. And the result of that is a framework called Global Disk, and the company is called ICQ Global.
That's awesome. I will share with you that a lot of great inventions and wonderful achievements have been born out of pain and adversity. I found that most people who are driven to become great and share great things, that's exactly where it comes from. So great to see you, Cornelia, tuning in today from Spring, Texas. And as you do hop on the show, please feel free to say hi, say where you're from. We'd love to welcome you to the show, because today we'll be talking about how your unique work style may or may not help you depending on the company you are working in. So with that being said, because it sounds like, based on what you shared with us, that you experienced some friction between personality types. Is that correct?
Exactly. But that time I didn't know that, because I specialized in Eastern and Western European joint ventures, really country-specific models. Then I didn't even think about personality types, because they teach you that these are the French values. This is how French people think and behave. It's just not true. Science doesn't support that. So it can be misleading. That's the problem, that often we do something that feels right. It doesn't make it true. And that's the problem with that. And this is exactly what my research revealed, that 95% of companies buy and sell people solutions created in the 60s and 70s. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we love our great-grandparents. But when those people answer the questions, there was no internet, no EU, no cheap flights, no mass migration. They had very different challenges than us. It's almost like trying to fix a smart TV with tools designed for black and white ones. Yes, you can try it harder, but it's different. It's not going to get you the results.
Right.
But often people don't realize that familiarity is not the same as efficiency. They hear something enough times, they believe it's true. It's the universal truth. Oh, it's a popular model. It's a popular solution. It must be up to date. That's not the case.
Right. It's absolutely not. Good to see you, Rita, tuning in from New York. So I'd love to know from those of you who are tuning in or watching or just lurking and hanging out, haven't quite said hi yet, have you ever had a personality clash at work that became, let's say, insurmountable? So it almost actually either made you leave the organization, or you almost left the organization. I know I've had that happen, where I didn't fit in. In fact, I shared last week that I was actually fired from my first job. No real explanation why. Yes, young perfectionist me, fired from my first job. It was traumatic. Didn't really understand why, and they didn't give me a reason why, other than I didn't fit in. So from your perspective, Csaba, what does that tell you?
That's a typical case of homophilic diversity. It sounds like a disease, but it just means that we like and trust people who are similar to us. But we also have to understand that we are wired that way, because hanging out with people who think and behave differently requires us to use the neocortex, and it uses way too much energy. So we are designed to stay in the comfort zone. That's why most people don't do that. It's physically tiring.
Right.
But once we recognize that, we can do something about it. It doesn't make you a bad person. That's really primal, that we want to hang out with people who are similar to us because it's more comfortable. That's how we can save energy. And according to the brain, that is safe. Even though certainty and safety do not exist in nature, we crave them. So we have to understand the hardware. The context is very different, but the hardware is very ancient.
That's right.
How do you fix something? How do you upgrade it if you don't know how it works? That's the real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I will share with you that before I became aware of different types of work styles and personality types, I just figured, well, everybody should be like me, right? I mean, that's common sense.
Yeah.
I could clearly see that you needed to do a certain way or act a certain way or solve a problem a certain way, because that was common sense, which is highly subjective, not objective, by the way. Good to see you, Tim, tuning in. So again, if any of you have ever had this happen to you, where you just had that friction, couldn't quite get past it in your workplace or personal life. We don't get to choose our relatives, and they're not always the same personality type as us. Common sense tells you, without having further knowledge, that this person is crazy, or they just don't get it, or they're just not on the same playing field. And well, whatever, right? But when we start to learn more about personality types and work styles, I'll give you a quick synopsis. I was introducing one of my new at that time coaching clients to the concept of why her and her boss did not get along. There was a lot of friction there. She was a S dominant in this spectrum. He's a D, very driven. They did not get along at all. And with that knowledge, after her meeting that she had with him, she reported back to me. She was like, I had the first meeting with him and I didn't feel like I was going to throw up. It actually went really well. So knowledge is power because we can't assume. Right? And that's what you do, isn't it? You help people understand that deeper level of knowledge, understanding how they can show up in certain scenarios or whether that scenario just doesn't fit with them.
Exactly, because often people are really passionate about learning how to manage other people, how to teach them common sense, but the foundation is yourself, the mindset. 95% of our actions are driven by values and beliefs you're not even aware of, but we think that we are so objective and logical. And that's just not true. So that is step one. We have to get to know ourselves, because let's be honest, you can walk away from any relationships except for the one with yourself. So it makes sense to get it right, because if it doesn't work out, then you're going to be really frustrated. If you have a low self-esteem, you don't like yourself, then you're not going to like other people either, at least not in a healthy way. Because if your self-esteem depends on how many people like you, you try to avoid conflicts, or maybe you have to lash out on other people to feel important, that's going to be really bad. So let's focus on the foundation. It starts with us, not because something is wrong. It's because everything can be even better. And this is where the language is important. Because you also brought up a really interesting question, that is it a personality or is it about the culture? So if you look at the surface level, it seems like we talk about two different things, personality or culture. But if you look at the only layer of diversity that has proven benefit in terms of performance, cognitive diversity, the invisible layer, that is difficult. So for example, if you have a conflict with somebody in your own family, then often maybe you label it as personal differences. But if the exact same situation happens with someone from a different country, for example, you might label it as cultural differences. But on the cognitive level, it was exactly the same thing.
Right.
Plus, if you look at the research that more than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them, then you realize that you have much more knowledge than you realize, but you have this illusion of separation. So often we are holding ourselves back, or we just use it as an excuse that, yeah, different culture, different personality, instead of actually thinking about the conflict itself and how we can make the most of it. Because that's exactly where the potential lies. It means that they see the same situation from different perspectives. And that's the dividing line between diversity and inclusion. What happens after that? Can you disagree with someone without feeling that you are more or less than them? Most people cannot. But that's exactly where we need the uncommon mindset, because life makes sense from their perspective. So let's find out what that is. I cannot expect common sense. I cannot expect you to come to the same conclusion as me. You have different background, different values and beliefs. But life makes sense from your perspective as well. So let's ask the right questions. What can you see that I cannot? What do you know that I don't? If you are able to do that, that leads to innovation. Otherwise, it turns into painful liability. But if I understand your logic, then at least, hopefully, we can get to the point where we can disagree, but I can still respect you. I can tolerate that perspective. And if we can cross that line, we can make the world a better place.
Right. And you shared something with me earlier prior to hopping on live. Culture is what we are used to, not a definition of self per se. Ourselves, are how we are defined, what gives us energy, what drains us, that's more fundamental and is culture agnostic, if you will. That's fundamental to the human. So what we do is we get hung up at the cultural level, and we can't get past that to the human level. So I'm really synthesizing a lot here. I'm really boiling that down. And Tim shared, he said language is so critical, speaking the language, going to other people's bus, if you will.
Yeah.
All right, getting past okay, if we're talking about DE and I, okay, diversity is a given, that's going to happen, but the inclusion doesn't always happen because naturally uneducated, if we're not making the unconscious conscious, we tend to bias towards people who are like ourselves, who think the same way we do, who think the same things are funny as we do. I'm married to a gentleman from the UK, and he'll talk about things from his childhood. No idea. And if I talk about things from my childhood, he has no idea. So sometimes, there's that context that just we can't understand, the same things. So does that create friction? Fortunately not, because we do like a number of other things. They're very, very similar. But it's just being able to get to the human level and I guess pull away all the extraneous trappings, right?
I think that is difficult because if you're lacking self-awareness and your identity is based on one or two bigger cultural groups, like your nationality or your profession, and then somebody attacks that, that's a problem. So if you look at cultural groups as prepackaged mindsets, almost like something you can download, something you can order from Amazon. I'm a vegan. I belong to this political party. They tell you exactly what is right, what is wrong, who you have to like, who you have to hate. And often that is part of the identity even more than belonging to something. Who are you against? Which is not really healthy. But if you don't know yourself, the world is falling apart around you. There's a lot of uncertainty. Where do you find that feeling of certainty? Is that the national identity? Is that a political party? Is that something else? But then you depend on them. And that is really, really dangerous place. And we can see what's happening when people take advantage of that. So to me, that's one of the most terrifying, but also motivating questions. Do you know yourself better than the social media algorithms and the people who are trained to take advantage of you?
Yeah,
let's be honest.
Topic.
I don't think that anybody can say yes. And the ones who can, I think they are pretty naive. It's pretty impossible. But the more you understand yourself and others, the kind of safer you are.
Yeah, and the more you understand yourself and others, the more you can show up what I say, knowledge is power, right? So you can show up much more powerfully in any space you tend to inhabit. And when you mentioned algorithms, what I've noticed, particularly after last year, a lot of people have been isolated, and so I started studying, researching what does happen to the brain during isolation. And this is humans, cross-culturally. It doesn't have any difference, where you're from, which language you speak, or anything else. But one of the items is not only does it decrease your cognitive function, but also increases what we might call tribalism. So that tendency to be very fearful and defend what we already know and almost become insular about it, really focusing on that. And with algorithms already showing us only what we know, like, and trust already, it reduces neuroplasticity. So what happens is we're less open to ideas and less open to exploring and less open to asking questions and challenging our own mindset. And that's not a very good place to be, because I see a lot of people identifying with, okay, I'm this or I'm that, or I have this political thing, or I'm for this or I'm for that, without exploring anything outside of that.
Right. And you explained it perfectly well, what happens on an individual level. And if you take it to the group level, it's even worse. Because cognitive diversity exists and it's beneficial because you can see the same situation from different perspectives. If you can make it work, it's fantastic. Otherwise, people just clash. But let's assume that we can. But when you're under pressure, especially for an extended period of time, and people are lacking self-awareness, so they cannot trust yourself, they have to find their trust in somebody else. So often, they give their power away to an authority figure. If that's a politician, that's somebody in a religion, doesn't really matter. They give away the power. To make it worse, if that leader is dominant, so only that perspective is heard, and everybody is confirming to that, then you lose the power of cognitive diversity when you need it the most. And that is really dangerous. And I think we can see similar dynamics in the world now. They give away that power. There's one dominant leader. And that person is going to tell you what is right, what is wrong. But still, it doesn't matter how smart they are, it is still just one perspective. And that makes it really, really dangerous. And of course, we have to stick together. We have to be in a tribe, because I cannot admit that I was weak, or I got fooled,
Right.
or I'm not smart enough.
Pride and ego is too strong.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I have seen people defend when you get the research and objective standpoint to it, a very losing proposition, because they don't want to admit that they made the wrong choice, right?
No, because it's really bad. Because if I admit that I was wrong, then I make the world even more unpredictable. I can't have it. So I have to double down. If I know I'm wrong, I double down even more, because I cannot make my world even more unpredictable. I cannot create more uncertainty.
Right. Right.
That's the issue with that.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that, particularly in strong change cycles, and we are in a very strong change cycle right now. And a lot of this is good. A lot of it, we're bringing up a lot of topics that need to be discussed. We need to be more open and inclusive. We're in a global marketplace, whether you like it or not. You are in a global marketplace. How do you handle that? How can you elevate your level of neuroplasticity? And it's interesting, and I should know who said this, but someone said neuroplasticity is a hope for human mankind, because it allows us to form new concepts and be open to new ideas, and basically get out of our mindset ruts we find ourselves stuck in when we're insular and we're too padded by social media, and we're not out there enough. We're not challenging our own standpoints enough. We're not opening up enough. So how do we elevate that? And one of those is becoming aware, right? And being self-aware. Who am I? Because without knowing who you are and how you are showing up, it's very difficult to know how to show up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that is the theory, and it works if people do it. But if you look at the wiring of people, then it goes against nature. Telling people to get out of the comfort zone, to talk to people who are different, that is just not natural. We are not designed that way. So that's why we have to understand what is the benefit of doing it, and also what is the cost of ignoring it. And because of the lockdown, like you said, the tribalism just got really strong for that reason, because we are losing the skills. In the past, we had to get along with people who were thinking and behaving differently. Today, everything happens online. I don't like you, then I can block you. Done. And I can join a group where everybody agrees with me. So we can just beef up this cognitive bubble, and then I feel that everybody thinks like me. And the social media algorithms are designed that way as well. They dismiss everything that you disagree with, and they just amplify your beliefs. And it gives us an insane level of confidence for the wrong reasons.
Right.
But we are losing those skills, because if I don't like you, I can get rid of you, and I can find people like me. I'm not confined to my city or village. Globally,
you
so
don't
many people
have
think
to
like
get
me.
along. And see, that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm seeing. And this is alarming. And a lot of people, and you're welcome, people are welcome to disagree with me, but based on the research and based on what I've observed as a coach and as someone who's a neuroscience nerd and all that, I'm seeing that the skills that we have leveraged to form bonds and build communities and collaborate as a human race is starting to slowly dissolve, because we have these things. We have smartphones, we have smart devices, we have algorithms. And here's the thing, already our brain is a highly advanced filter. We receive somewhere around 11 million bits of information per second, but we only process 4 or to 7 bits, not million, bits of information per second, which is still a lot. Which means our brain is filtering out a lot of information because we just can't handle that kind of bombardment. What else does that mean? Well, our brain filters based on what our mindset tells it to filter. So if you are expecting situation X or Y, that is what your brain shows you, even in defiance of actual reality. Like you will start to look for evidence. Your brain is giving you evidence that your mindset is right, and your ego reinforces it. And then you have algorithms who compound it. So this is a real problem. And Gail just mentioned, she said, tribalism as it relates to isolation. New idea for my library. Yes, it's very, very prevalent right now. And when we're going back, when we're talking about in the workplace, and we have to collaborate, right, Csaba? We have to collaborate in the workplace to get things done. Collaborative environments build organizations, usually, unless you're, I don't know, doing everything in little isolated bubbles. But usually that's how it works. So now we're having to collaborate, and we're having to collaborate with people who differ from us, have different ideas. Oh, they're Republican, I'm a Democrat, or they really like the soccer team or football, and I don't, which is even more important. And now we have to get past these things, but we're not being encouraged to.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the problem with the echo chambers, that you would think that if we have a conversation and we disagree, then that would make my opinion more nuanced, more subtle. But right now we can see that, at least in the past, everything was based a bit more on facts. So there was some kind of common ground. But today, you don't know what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is fake news, because the technology is so awesome. Look at deepfake. Look at the technology. You don't know what is true. But also, there's something else. That the echo chamber is powerful, and it lets the information in. But also, they discredit the other side, so that information is dismissed upon arrival. Because we have this perception that not just they are wrong, but they are also against us. They are evil.
Which is very powerful.
So technically, the different opinions just amplify our own beliefs and perspective. Because I know they're just against us. They just try to convince us. They want to trick us. We don't even consider it. It just amplifies our own beliefs. That's the real problem with that.
Yeah. It doesn't encourage us to go, oh, well, wait a minute. They have a different perspective. Maybe I should ask why. No. They're the enemy. They're out to get us. So I'm going to hop topics really quickly. I'm going to hop topics over to our personal identities, our own work styles, and how it may or may not resonate with company cultures and works and their dominant work styles or expectations of behavior, particularly around authenticity.
That's an interesting topic. That's exactly the topic of my second book, The Toxic Authenticity. Because I think it's more like a glorified form of fixed mindset. Often people overdo it. This is who I am, deal with it. I believe in the freedom of speech. If I say something, I can do it. But if you say something I don't like, I get offended.
You get offended, that's right.
It's a two-way street. If you want freedom, pay the price, which is responsibility. You can be authentic, but you don't live in isolation unless you want to. But that's your freedom there. That's your portion. Otherwise, it requires responsibility and interaction. So if it's a good idea, but if we overdo it, it becomes our weakness. Yes, of course, accept yourself, but it doesn't mean that you cannot improve. It doesn't mean that there's not a better way of doing things. It doesn't mean that I have to tolerate everything that you do. That's not what it means.
Now we have a question here from Gail. She asked, what's the name of the second book that you're working on?
That is going to be Authenticity. It's very difficult to pronounce it.
Okay, we'll have to type that. If you don't mind, after the live show ends, just type that in the comments. That way we'll know. Because currently we have Uncommon Sense in Unusual Times, which I think is a fascinating book. I've read a little bit of it so far. I haven't been able to read the whole thing, but it's really interesting. So I love your standpoint where you're coming from. And you're right in that some people use authenticity as almost like the shield. Oh, here, I'm authentic. You have to deal with me, whether you like it or not. However, I will show you personally, I was authentically unaware of how my mindset and my actions affected those around me. And I was authentic. However, I was also, let's just say, not doing myself any favors based on my company culture. And I would have to say cultural expectations in general, right? I was very driven, no shock, because Csaba knows my personality profile, my work style profile. Very driven, not necessarily chatty. I believe that gossip was irrelevant for the workplace. I shouldn't have to get to know people. I really didn't know people beyond positions. And for some of you who've seen me before, this is not a new story. If you've read my book, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income, it's certainly in there as well. I had to learn the hard way that if you want to excel within company culture, within your community, which has a certain set of expectations and rules of behavior, if you will, what can you adopt to help you do that? And I think that's where authenticity and company culture all of a sudden start becoming a friction point.
And that's exactly why we have to measure the mindset gap between what is natural to you and what is normal and expected around you. If that's your family, your company, your profession, your country, it doesn't matter. Everywhere, there is a normal behavioral style that most people conform to. So that's the real question. How big is the gap? That's how the magic happens. The more you have to flex, the more draining it is. It doesn't mean that you change your personality, but you have to flex your behavior. Right. So when you take an assessment, we learn about your preferences. And statistically, most people have 5 to 10% flexibility. That's our comfort zone. This is where we stay. But then also your company has a corporate comfort zone. We can call it culture, because that is the behavior that is rewarded and punished. So how far is that? How big is that comfort zone? How big is the difference between you and that environment? And more disturbingly, how much do you have to pretend in order to be accepted? That's a disturbing, but also really real question.
It is, yes. Oh, in America particularly, we tend to worship the extrovert ideal. And as a result of that, a certain set of behaviors are expected to build relationships and form social bonds. Now, in Asia, it's very, very different. In fact, more respect is given to those people who are more reserved and don't necessarily speak up first, more quiet, more analytical. So a very different set of respect is given to those who exhibit these behaviors. In America, you have to be bold and forthright. In Asia, it's very, very different set of expectations. And for people, and I coach mostly people who identify with being reserved, for those individuals who want to get up, for those people who want to move up within the organizations, what is it? What behaviors can I adopt that's within my flex zone that won't drain me too much to allow me to move up? And I think that's the magic of your assessment.
Exactly. And technically, we approach it from a slightly different angle, because when we talk about inclusion, technically, we also talk about the size of the corporate comfort zone. How big is that? What is the behavior that you still accept, tolerate, and the rest is punished? So can we expand that? But also there's a missing part, which is the individual, the active participation. Because maybe that's a really inclusive team. You could speak up, you could do whatever you want to, but you're lacking self-inclusion. You're not confident. You're hiding yourself. So you have all the opportunities, but you don't speak up. You don't step up. So this is what we have to work on as well. Self-inclusion, that is the foundation. Not just because you want to speak up, but how can you be inclusive towards others if you cannot even accept yourself? And let's be honest, even a lot of extroverted leaders have this problem. That's why they have to overcompensate. That's why they do a bad job, because they are not happy there, because they are not stable. So they have to top it up with some aggression. Or maybe the other way around. You have to hide and you have to be a people pleaser, so that keeps you safe. Other people deal with it differently. Maybe I have to get everything right, perfectionistic. And I can also lie to myself. Oh, I just have high standards. That's not exactly the truth. The underlying fear is always, if I don't make a mistake, nobody can attack me. How you package it to yourself, how you justify, that's a different story. It's still a saboteur. And once we get to know this, it's really powerful.
Right. Someone shared for YouTube, so companies set the norm when it comes to behavior. And that ends up creating fake multiplets of the manager. How boring. It happens. It does happen. It does happen, or can happen. And it can create conflict. If companies have a certain expectation of how one behaves to get ahead, and your natural proclivity is not in alignment with that, in fact, it's very distant, then that becomes an issue. Take, for example, I was coaching a young lady who was more reserved and more analytical, identified being an S on the spectrum. And her company culture was very deep, very dominant. She was miserable, and they perceived her as incompetent. It wasn't that she was incompetent, but that's how she was perceived because of how she communicated, made decisions, how her thought processes, the whole makeup of her personality. So it's while we can say we just accept everybody, we're inclusive. DE and I doesn't just stop at what color your skin and color of your hair and where you're from. I think it's much deeper than that. Much deeper than that to be inclusive of different, neural styles, neuronormals versus people who are not, and including different work styles. Now, Csaba, what can we do? We've got all these challenges here, right here. We've got a strong change cycle. We've got people who are tribal mentalities here and becoming more so because they're shown what they already know and reinforcing that already natural, inclination to filter out anything that's dissenting of their own mindset. So that's being reinforced. And we have a crying need to become more global, more universal, more open. Particularly DE&I and et cetera and beyond, and knowing ourselves, what's the solution here? What can we do? What's our first step?
I think that companies often speak the language of money and performance.
Mm-hmm.
So often this is how we introduce the topic. Because sometimes it feels like that, the diversity and inclusion is a really important topic, but people are getting bored of it. Because a lot of companies use it as a PR and marketing tool without actually understanding the topic. So they focus on the visible layer without understanding the invisible one, the cognitive diversity. And if they are not getting the results, then they think, well, that was fake news. That doesn't work. Well, that's not the problem. Just because I give you all the parts for an airplane, and if you don't know how to put them together, and you come to the conclusion that airplanes don't fly, well, that would be wrong. That wasn't the reason. So, we have to make it work. It's something that we need to learn. This is where common sense doesn't really work. So we introduced this topic using the language of money. So, for example, the Three Circle Partners, the US company, had a really interesting research. They wanted to understand how come you put really smart people in a team and they deliver only a fraction of the results they're capable of. They don't know why, or they don't know how much potential remains untapped. So the experiment showed that on average, 79% of potential is lost in a team due to interaction. Because 90% of business is interaction between people who think and behave differently. 79%. Is that good for the business? And the reason is exactly what you described. Because if there's an extroverted leader, then, of course, they are loud, they are assertive. And the introverts are just waiting. They're waiting for their turn. But that never comes. So it's lost. But from an extroverted perspective, it is obvious that if they had something to say, they would speak up. Because they would. And that's how the potential is lost. Or maybe they had a good idea and somebody shut them down. Or just dismissed it. And now they think, you know what, I don't care. This is where psychological safety is so important. Because what if 8 people agree and 1 disagrees? What happens then? Do you conform to the norms? Or you stand your ground because you know you're right? And most of the time, they don't. And that's exactly where potential is lost. So if we can quantify this, how much the lack of psychological safety costs them, then it hurts enough. So we can do this exercise, for example, asking that if the average is 79%, what if we could just improve it by 5%? What would that mean to you a month? Would that be $10,000? For how long have you had your company? A year? That's $120,000. And for how long are you willing to bleed money? Now you made it practical, personal, and emotional. If that's the language they understand, that's how we introduce it. So they understand that people skills equal business skills. They are not soft. Like Jacob Morgan published the book, The Future Leader. And he asked, that was last year, and he asked 140 top CEOs and 14,000 employees one question: what we should be teaching leaders now to prepare for the future? And he came up with 4 mindsets and 5 skills, and 8 of those were directly linked to how much you understand yourself and others. So these are the statistics and approaches that we use to show, listen, this is not charity. If that's what you want, do it because you want to make more money. But often these companies spend more money on employee engagement surveys than on employee engagement. But also if you look at the most disengaged layer of a company, that's middle management. That's the bottom 5% according to Gallup. And they are the ones who should implement the well-being programs, the employee engagement programs. They are in survival mode already. They need help. So what if we can focus on them, but most of the budget is for senior leaders? But what if you focus on them so they are less damaged by the time they get to the top? Would that make more sense? To address the root cause of the problem instead of treating the symptoms? That's our approach.
Right. And I'll share with you, for everybody tuning in and watching the podcast later, that with all my clients, we all do, particularly when it comes to career clarity or understanding how to grow. Not only do we want some idea of where your target is, but we also have to understand who you are. And we all do a work style assessment because we have to understand what the foundation is, but you can't improve upon something you don't understand, right? That's the foundation, understanding who you are, and then having that knowledge to fuel a catalyst of change and opening the eyes, but making the unconscious conscious. That's the large part of it. And that way we can make better decisions. That way we can preempt our own bad habits. And it's part of the reason why I wrote my book, actually, Elevate Your Career for More Impact and Income, because we need to make the unconscious conscious. We need to not operate on common sense and just fixed mindsets and keep trudging along this path because surely I'm right because I don't know any different. And then most importantly, regain back the bleeding cash. And you're right, because I mean, when it comes to a company perspective, you're bleeding cash in innovation and results. You really are. And when I got my certification in leadership psychology, it's one of the topics they talked about. How if we don't create a safe zone, in other words, a process to make sure that those people who are not being heard are heard,
yeah,
then you are losing massive amounts of innovation and new ideas. And we just keep doing the same thing because it's what we already know. But that's not necessarily what you need to hear or need to latch onto to get where you want to go. we just keep rehashing, but you need new ideas, but those new ideas aren't being put forth because those people aren't being heard. So you have to create a process in order for those people to be heard.
I think that was the key, what you mentioned, that often people don't want to be right, but they want to be heard. And if they feel that they are suppressed and nobody listens to them, that's where people get really disengaged, but in a really nasty way. And they're going to actively ruin your business even without you knowing about it. Mm-hmm. But if they know that they said what they wanted to say and they got a reply and somebody explained why something cannot happen, it's much easier to accept it. But suppressing people, ignoring them, that creates disengagement. I think that's one of the most dangerous reasons.
All right, that's one of the most dangerous things. So I shared earlier, and before we wrap up the show today, I want to make sure that you see how to reach out to Csaba. Of course, reach out to him on LinkedIn, and we are currently live right now on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you're watching the replay later, feel free to drop us a note. We'll be happy to come back, with any replies to any questions that you have about what we shared today, whether that be diversity, inclusion, DE&I, authenticity in the workplace, how we're seeing our communities and culture really start to lose some of the fundamental necessary, I always have to say, skills in order to build ourselves as a human race, agnostic of culture, and or how you can make sure that you excel within your workplace. Because oftentimes what we do is we feel frustrated, we're burned out, we don't ask the question, we don't get introspective, we don't understand where we're coming from versus the company culture, and we leave. And guess what happens? We dive right back into the same situation. Because we don't know how to avoid it. And that's one of the things I do with my clients, understanding that clarity piece of it, really getting a firm idea with a disc. And that's what you leverage too, because it is a disc based, but it goes much beyond, just, oh, you're a DI or you're an SC. Much more. It gives you an idea. Okay, if you're in a driven culture, you're in a very D culture, this is what you can expect, and this is how to identify that, and this is how to thrive in that, right?
Exactly, and that's what we call leveling up. And that's exactly what you described. That often people end up in the same job, the same bad relationship, and they always blame somebody else, obviously not themselves. Because taking responsibility for their own growth takes energy, and you have to save it. So that's not a good idea. So they never level up. But when you tell people to change, that implies that they are not good enough, and nobody likes that. But when, for example, you play a video game, then you have lots of challenges. You learn new skills, and at the end, you have to destroy the monster. If you do, you level up. If you don't, you start over. And this is what most people do. Like Ray Dalio said that pain plus reflection equals progress. Now, we have the pain part, but not the reflection part, so there is no progress. But how can you reflect on something you don't know about? So
Right.
if 95% of our actions are driven by values and beliefs we are not even aware of, it doesn't matter how much you reflect. It doesn't matter how much I reflect on how to say good night in Russian if I don't speak Russian. We can discuss the symptoms, but we cannot go deeper. Not because we are not smart enough, it's because we don't learn about this in schools. So for example, most of our clients don't know what power distance is. And definitely they don't know what their own preference is, even though it determines everything every single day. What feels right, what feels wrong when they interact with someone. So when something goes against those values, it triggers a really intense emotional response.
Mm-hmm.
People freak out, and it is so obviously wrong, they cannot even explain it. But then how can I get to know you? But first, you have to get to know yourself.
Right.
That's step one. And not because we are not good enough, it's because we can be even better. That's a different story. We can level up. It's you, but an upgraded version.
Right. It's so important. I mean, all starts inside. Like I mentioned before, you can't improve on something you don't understand.
Yeah.
You just can't. And getting that knowledge is so powerful. I've literally seen so many lives transformed just by having the knowledge. They didn't make significant changes per se, but they now understand, oh, when I'm interacting with this individual or group of individuals, it's not personal.
Yeah.
That's their style. It's not that they dislike me. Right. And Gail mentioned, she's like, mentoring and coaching are both needed now more than ever. And I think you're right, because we're in such strong change cycles, a lot of turmoil, a lot of VUCA. And for leaders and companies who are individuals who want to level up, getting that self-awareness, getting that knowledge at the individual level and understanding work styles and what that means and how you can leverage your strengths is absolutely critical. Csaba, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show. I hope that all of you got as much out of this as I did. And of course, feel free to reach out to us later if you have any questions. If you're watching the podcast on any of the major channels, feel free to give us a thumbs up, a like, or a star, whichever channel you're on. And if you're watching the replay later, just know that we're happy to answer your questions. Just pop them in the comments below, and we'll get right back to you. As always, great pleasure, Csaba. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Great to see all of you tuning in all over the world and all over the different social media channels from LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Until later, bye for now. Keep elevating.